Okay, let's get started. We're looking at some material today that, frankly, begins with some pretty shocking numbers.
Yeah, the statistic about, 1,600 people dying from cancer every day just in the U.S.?
Every single day.
Yeah.
That adds up to 600,000 a year. And, the really concerning part is that it's apparently increasing.
It does make you stop and think. I mean, if the conventional wisdom, the current treatments are on the right track, why aren't those numbers going down?
Exactly. Which leads us into what we're really digging into today. It's this alternative perspective, a really powerful one presented in these sources.
The one that challenges the mainstream idea that cancer is, fundamentally a genetic problem.
Precisely. We're exploring the work primarily associated with Dr. Seyfried, arguing that cancer is actually a metabolic disease rooted in mitochondria.
The damaged mitochondria, yeah, that's the core idea.
So our mission, our goal for this deep dive is to really unpack that, understand this metabolic view. What's the argument? What's the mechanism? According to this model, what actually fuels cancer?
And importantly, what are the practical strategies that come out of thinking about it this way for prevention, maybe even treatment?
Right. Let's jump into these sources and see what we can pull out.
Well, the central thesis is pretty bold. Dr. Seyfried, based on the material, suggests that if we really grasped cancer as a mitochondrial metabolic issue, we could potentially cut the death rate by, over 50%? In maybe 5 years? It's a huge claim.
Wow. Okay. So the idea is it's not mainly about random gene mutations starting the fire. It's the energy system breaking down first.
That's the argument. The metabolic failure precedes the widespread genetic chaos we see in cancer cells.
Okay, so metabolism.
Yeah.
Mitochondria. Let's start there. The sources describe them, but maybe give us the quick version. What do they do in a healthy cell?
Think of them as these tiny, almost like separate organisms living inside our cells. They even have their own DNA, which is fascinating.
Little power plant.
Exactly. Their main job is making energy, ADP, the cell's fuel currency. And they do this incredibly efficiently using oxygen, that's oxidative phosphorylation.
Okay.
And that efficient energy is just crucial. It lets cells do their specific jobs, a liver cell doing liver things, a brain cell firing signals. It keeps things stable, ordered, metabolic homeostasis, they call it.
So crucial for normal function. What happens when they get damaged? The material mentions chronic damage being key here.
Right. So severe sudden damage might just kill the cell, apoptosis. But the issue in cancer, this model suggests, is often this long-term simmering disruption. The mitochondria aren't working right, energy production is sputtering along, but the cell doesn't die. It adapts. It finds another way.
And that adaptation involves switching fuel sources, right, to fermentation, the oxygen-free method.
Yes, exactly. When the main power plants, the mitochondria, are struggling to use oxygen effectively, the cell reverts to this older, much less efficient way of making energy fermentation. Think of it like a backup generator that's not very good.
The Warburg Effect, sometimes called that.
That's the one. It's a hallmark of many cancer cells. But here's the crucial link this model makes.
Go on.
Mitochondria aren't just about energy production. They also seem to play a role in controlling cell division. They help keep it in check.
Okay.
So when mitochondrial function is damaged and the cell shifts over to relying heavily on fermentation, it loses that control. The brakes come off.
Well, they do time.
Dysregulated cell division, cells just growing and dividing without limit, which is,
That's cancer. Uncontrolled growth forming a tumor.
Precisely. So the tumor, in this view, isn't sparked by a genetic mistake primarily. It arises from this fundamental breakdown in energy metabolism.
And the genetic mutations we always hear about.
They're seen more as a result, a downstream consequence of the metabolic chaos and the genomic instability that follows when the cell's energy system is broken. The metabolism breaks first, then the genes get scrambled.
That really flips the script. Okay, so if damaged mitochondria are the origin point, what damages them? What causes this initial problem?
The material lists several known culprits, things like chemical carcinogens, definitely, radiation exposure, periods where cells don't get enough oxygen, hypoxia.
Right.
Even just the aging process itself can degrade mitochondrial function over time. Certain viruses, too, like hepatitis or papillomaviruses. And there are some rare inherited mutations that directly affect mitochondria.
So a range effect.
Full range.
Yeah.
But the sources put a really strong emphasis on, quote, a whole variety of things in the environment. And this is where it gets really interesting, connecting to our modern lives.
You mean the Western diet and lifestyle? That comes up strongly.
Absolutely. Things like very little physical activity, diets loaded with highly processed carbohydrates, sugars, chronic stress is mentioned too.
And the idea is this combination directly harms the mitochondria.
That's the connection being made. This lifestyle puts immense strain on our cellular energy systems, leading to that chronic mitochondrial dysfunction, which then allows for that dysregulated growth.
It makes a kind of intuitive sense, doesn't it?
Well, and look broader. The material connects the same pattern, poor diet, sedentary life, not just to cancer risk, but to a whole list of other major chronic diseases.
Like what?
Things like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, even macular degeneration. The suggestion is they might all share this common root of metabolic dysfunction.
Wow, a unifying theory almost.
It's a compelling idea, and it reframes the role of genetics, too.
How so?
The argument isn't that genes are irrelevant, but that they aren't the primary initiators for most of these common chronic diseases. Our genes, the material suggests, are actually trying to protect us.
Okay.
But they get overwhelmed. They can't cope when we constantly bombard our bodies with these metabolically damaging conditions, the bad food, the lack of movement, the stress. The environment trumps the genes, in a way.
Okay, so let's follow this logic. If cancer cells have faulty mitochondria, they're relying on this inefficient fermentation. What specific fuels do they desperately need? What are they eating?
According to Seyfried's work presented here, there are two main ones: glucose, the simple sugar,
Right, makes sense.
and an amino acid called glutamine. Because their main energy system is broken, they become ravenous for these specific fuels to power that rapid, uncontrolled growth via fermentation.
And healthy cells.
Healthy cells with working mitochondria are much more flexible. They aren't so desperately dependent on just glucose and glutamine. In fact, the material emphasizes it's very hard for cancer to get established if the mitochondria are healthy and functional.
Okay, so that points directly to a strategy, doesn't it? If cancer needs glucose and glutamine, starve it.
That's the core of the metabolic approach described. Cut off the supply of those primary fuels, glucose and glutamine, while giving healthy cells alternative fuels they can use.
Like ketones, which brings us to the ketogenic diet.
Exactly. That's a central strategy mentioned. High healthy fats, moderate protein, very, very low carbohydrates.
How did that work against cancer, according to this?
It's pretty direct. You dramatically lower carb intake, so blood glucose levels drop. The body adapts by burning fat and producing ketones. Healthy cells with their good mitochondria can switch over and use ketones for energy quite efficiently. But many cancer cells adapted to guzzle glucose for fermentation really struggle in that low glucose, high ketone state. You're essentially changing the metabolic environment to be hostile to them.
The sources get specific about foods, too, like healthy fats are key. Olive oil, coconut oil, avocados, grass-fed butter, MCT oil.
Yes, high-quality fats become the primary energy source. Protein needs to be adequate, but not excessive, because the body can turn excess protein into glucose. So things like pasture-raised eggs, grass-fed meat, wild fish.
And carbs are mainly non-starchy vegetables. Spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, leafy greens.
That's right, nuts and seeds in small amounts. Fruit is generally limited to low-sugar options like berries, maybe avocado, which is technically a fruit.
But it's not zero carbs, is it? The material clarifies that.
No, not zero. It acknowledges complex carbs from those non-starchy vegetables are generally fine. Even small amounts of low glycemic fruits, maybe like grapefruit.
Right. The key is avoiding the high glycemic stuff.
Exactly. White bread, pasta, potatoes, sugary drinks, anything that causes a rapid spike in blood sugar and insulin. Understanding the glycemic index, how quickly foods raise glucose, becomes really important. Keep glucose low and stable.
Okay, so keto is one tool. What else is mentioned? Caloric restriction.
Yeah, simply reducing overall calorie intake. The idea is it lowers overall metabolic stress, might improve mitochondrial function, and just generally reduces the amount of fuel available for cancer cells to grow.
Makes sense. And fasting comes up too.
Definitely. Intermittent fasting, regular periods without food, or even more intensive, medically supervised water-only fasting.
What's the goal there?
To really push the body into nutritional ketosis, get those GKI values of glucose ketone index really low. That index reflects the ratio of glucose to ketones. A low GKI signifies a metabolic state that's thought to be very unfavorable for glucose-dependent cancer cells, while healthy cells adapt. It also helps keep insulin levels very low.
There's that anecdote in the material, isn't there? About Guy Tannenbaum.
Yes, quite a striking story. diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, also had type 2 diabetes, hypertension.
And he used water-only fasting and metabolic therapy.
Right. And according to the source, he saw a complete remission of the prostate cancer, plus reversal of his diabetes and hypertension. It's presented as a powerful example of this approach working in a real person.
That's pretty incredible. It also ties back to that point about Aboriginal populations, right?
Yeah, the observation that before adopting Western diets when they ate low-carb were physically active cancer was reportedly almost unknown. Their metabolic systems were in top shape.
A stark contrast to today, where cancer rates are so high, sometimes even overtaking heart disease in some areas.
It really underscores the potential link this model draws between our modern lifestyle, mitochondrial health, and cancer risk.
So wrapping this up, the main takeaway from digging into these sources is this compelling alternative view that maybe cancer isn't fundamentally genetic, but metabolic.
Right. Driven by damage to our cellular energy generators, the mitochondria, often linked to diet and lifestyle, and fueled specifically by glucose and glutamine.
Which leads to these metabolic strategies.
Ketogenic diets, caloric restriction, fasting, ways to target that metabolic vulnerability, creating an environment where cancer struggles but healthy cells can thrive.
It certainly gives you a lot to think about. I mean, if cancer's origins are so deeply tied to our energy metabolism, influenced so much by how we eat and live, does that fundamentally shift how you might approach prevention, or even think about treatment options and your own long-term health? Could focusing on metabolic health be, well, one of the most powerful levers we have? Definitely something to consider.